Picture a medieval court at its height. Stone walls hung with banners, golden chandeliers flickering with candlelight, nobles whispering in silks, and armored knights standing guard. At the center sits the king upon his throne, the embodiment of authority, his gaze heavy with the power of life and death. Around him, courtiers murmur carefully chosen words, each phrase weighed to avoid offense. And then, into this charged atmosphere, steps a figure unlike any other. A man in motley, bells jingling on his cap, a wooden bauble in hand, grinning as though he had no fear in the world. The court falls silent. The fool has arrived. The fool's presence in such a setting was both strange and essential. Unlike nobles who bent their words to please, the fool spoke freely, cloaking his truths in jokes and riddles. He could tease the queen, mock the king, and insult the duke, all while making the court laugh. Where others trembled under royal authority, the fool alone could stride into the throne room with irreverence, laughing in the face of danger. His role was a paradox, to mock power, yet serve it. The arrival of the fool was often a welcome break from suffocating formality. Courtiers plotted, alliances shifted, and words carried sharp edges hidden beneath courtesy. But the fool cut through this fog with laughter, reminding even kings of their humanity. He told jokes that made lords blush, sang songs that poked fun at policy, and mimicked pompous advisers. Where flatterers drowned rulers in honeyed words, the fool delivered vinegar. Yet rulers swallowed it, because it was disguised as comedy. But there was more to his arrival than laughter. For kings, a fool was both shield and weapon. He could speak what others dared not, voicing dissent in jest to test the waters. A single joke could reveal whether a new law was unpopular or whether an alliance was resented. In a world where speaking too plainly could cost one's head, the fool became the voice of truth, safe because it was wrapped in absurdity. The fool's entry also carried a ritualistic air. His colorful motley garb signaled disorder, a reminder of festivals where commoners mocked their betters, of times when society turned upside down. In the court, his presence was a controlled echo of that chaos. He was both entertainer and reminder of the thin line between order and anarchy, between majesty and ridicule. Kings tolerated him not only for laughter, but because he symbolized a world where even power could be mocked. For the courtiers, however, his arrival was often a source of unease. The fool might lampoon their manners, expose their secrets, or turn their schemes into jokes. His sharp tongue spared no one, and though they might laugh on the surface, many seethed beneath. Unlike them, he did not fear exile or loss of lands. His value was not in estates, but in words, and as long as the king smiled, the fool was untouchable. Yet behind his grin, the fool knew his peril. A wrong jest, an insult that cut too deep, or laughter that mocked the wrong man could end his career, or his life. His motley, while comic, was also armor of a sort, a disguise that shielded him as he danced on the edge of danger. The fool's arrival was not just entertainment, it was performance on a knife's edge, where wit had to balance laughter and truth. Thus, the fool entered the medieval stage not as a clown to be dismissed, but as a figure of paradox, mocking yet vital, powerless yet influential. His arrival turned the court into a theater, where truth could slip through in disguise and laughter could strike harder than any sword. The fool, though mocked as a simpleton, was in truth the most dangerous voice in the room. Long before the fool took his place beside kings, his roots reached deep into ancient traditions of misrule and reversal. To understand why a monarch would welcome mockery into his court, one must look to the festivals of antiquity, where chaos and laughter were not only permitted, but celebrated. In these rituals, order was overturned, authority mocked, and laughter became a weapon against fear. The medieval fool inherited this legacy, carrying the spirit of carnival into the very heart of politics. One of the earliest precedents came from ancient Rome. During Saturnalia, the social order was inverted. Slaves dined like masters, masters served like slaves, and for a few days the rigid hierarchy dissolved into revelry. Mockery of authority was not rebellion, but ritual, a way to release tension and remind society of its fragile balance. Though temporary, this license to laugh at power left a cultural imprint that echoed into the medieval world. In the Christian Middle Ages, similar festivals of reversal emerged. The Feast of Fools, celebrated around the New Year, allowed lower clergy to parody their superiors. Young clerics dressed as bishops, or even as popes, processions mocked sacred rituals, and laughter replaced solemn prayer. Though scandalized church officials tried to suppress it, the Feast of Fools spread through Europe, its irreverence both shocking and irresistible. Here lay the seeds of the fool's role, a sanctioned mockery that could exist even within sacred institutions. Carnival, too, played its part. On the eve of Lent, villages erupted in wild celebration, with disguises, plays, and grotesque humor. The peasant who mocked his lord during carnival risked nothing, for laughter created a temporary freedom from punishment. This culture of jest and parody was woven into the lives of ordinary people, reminding them that authority was not untouchable. From this soil, the fool of the court grew, an institutionalized echo of the people's laughter. When these traditions entered the courts of kings and nobles, they transformed. The fool became a permanent carnival figure, a living reminder of chaos within the rigid structure of hierarchy. His clothes, motley, mismatched, and absurd, echoed the costumes of festival clowns. His wooden bauble, often topped with a carved head, mocked the royal scepter, a parody of authority carried into the king's presence. Where the feast had been temporary, the fool was enduring, the carnival spirit bound in human form. The medieval world, obsessed with symbols, saw in the fool a paradoxical necessity. He was both insider and outsider, admitted to the most intimate circles of power, yet marked as different, ridiculous, and untouchable. His license to speak freely was not accidental. It was inherited from those festival days when peasants mocked priests and slaves mocked masters. The fool was a ritual made flesh, the embodiment of controlled disorder. Yet this origin also carried danger. The church often viewed fools with suspicion, for their irreverence seemed to threaten the sanctity of authority. Bishops condemned the Feast of Fools as blasphemous, and councils attempted to ban it. But the fool endured, not only because laughter was irresistible, but because rulers saw his usefulness. What began as festival misrule became political theater, sanctioned mockery that could reveal truths without sparking revolt. Thus, the fool's origins lay not in madness or simplicity, but in tradition. He was the child of Saturnalia, the echo of carnival, the living memory of the Feast of Fools. From ritual, he became reality. From parody, he became politics. And when he entered the court, clad in motley and bells, he carried with him the laughter of centuries, a dangerous laughter that rulers found both entertaining and indispensable. The fool could never be mistaken for anyone else in the court. His appearance announced him before he even spoke. Motley garments stitched from clashing colors, a coxcomb cap with dangling bells, and in his hand, a bauble, a mock scepter topped with a carved head, often grotesque or comic. Every detail of his attire proclaimed difference, absurdity, and parody. In a world where clothing signified rank with strict precision, the fool's costume mocked the very system it inverted. The motley was not simply comic, it was symbolic. Nobles wore silks, knights bore armor, priests donned robes, each uniform a marker of order. The fool's clashing patchwork suggested chaos, disorder woven into cloth. His jingling bells announced his movements as though he were a walking reminder that laughter and disruption could appear at any moment. Even his cap, with its long ears, evoked both donkey and rooster, symbols of stupidity and arrogance, yet worn with pride. The fool's garb was a living satire, a performance before a word left his mouth. Yet it was not his costume alone that gave him power, but his tongue. In courts where words were as deadly as swords, the fool wielded humor like a blade. He told jokes that danced on the edge of insult, crafted riddles that concealed truths, and sang songs that disguised political commentary beneath rhyme and rhythm. What others whispered in fear, the fool proclaimed in laughter, and because it was laughter, it was tolerated. Consider the fool's weapon of parody. He might mimic the pompous tone of a noble counselor, exaggerating his gestures until the court laughed at his vanity. He could mock a rival's accent, a bishop's solemnity, or even the king's mannerisms, all while framing it as harmless jest. But beneath the comedy lay a sharp critique. Nobles laughed, but uneasily, for they knew the fool revealed truths they dared not face. The fool's license to speak stemmed from his costume as much as his wit. Because he looked ridiculous, he was treated as harmless. But this disguise was armor. His absurdity protected him from accusations of treason or blasphemy. If a noble complained, the fool could shrug. It was only a jest. Yet everyone knew that within the jest was truth. In this way, the fool cloaked his barbs, the motley becoming not only entertainment but camouflage. The fool's tongue, however, was double-edged. With one quip, he could amuse the king and secure favor. With another, he could offend and risk ruin. The line between boldness and folly was thin, and fools lived by their instinct to read the room. A mistimed joke, a jest too cruel, could end in dismissal, or worse. For all his freedom, the fool was never truly safe, and his motley was as much a warning as a shield. Beyond politics, the fool's tongue also carried wisdom. His riddles often contained moral lessons, his songs veiled philosophy. The paradox of the fool was that he, deemed lowest of intellects, often spoke with the sharpest clarity. His motley was the disguise of wisdom in madness, of truth in laughter. He was both ridiculous and profound, a man who mocked the world while exposing its flaws. Thus, the fool's clothes and tongue together defined his power. The motley made him untouchable, the bells announced his presence, the bauble mocked authority, and his sharp words pierced through ceremony. He was both spectacle and truth-teller, both clown and critic. And in a court where every gesture was calculated, the fool alone could laugh without fear. Yet every laugh was more dangerous than it appeared. To call a king a fool was treason. To criticize his policy could mean exile, imprisonment, or death. Yet there was one figure in the medieval court who could do both, and not only survive, but thrive. The court fool. His privilege was unique, his role extraordinary. By license of his office, he could speak truths that no advisor, knight, or noble dared utter. Cloaked in laughter, the fool told kings what others kept locked behind trembling lips. This freedom was not granted lightly. It was born of necessity. Kings surrounded themselves with flatterers, each eager to please, each fearful of speaking unwelcome truths. But flattery, unchecked, led rulers into folly. Policies pursued without counsel, wars fought without reason. The fool became the antidote. His mockery was medicine, bitter but necessary. By laughing at a king's vanity, he reminded him of mortality. By joking about his schemes, he revealed their flaws. The fool's jest was often the only voice of honesty in a chamber filled with deceit. History offers vivid examples. Triboulet, the French fool of Francis I, once mocked the king so sharply that Francis threatened to execute him. The fool, quick-witted, begged, "Very well, sire, but I beg you, by the privilege of my office, let me choose how I die." Intrigued, Francis granted the request. Triboulet replied, "Then I choose to die of old age." The court roared with laughter, and Francis spared him. Beneath the humor lay a reminder of the king's cruelty, a critique softened by wit. In England, Will Sommers, fool to Henry VIII, became one of the few who could speak plainly to the volatile monarch. While courtiers trembled at Henry's temper, Sommers jested about his greed, his marriages, and his endless taxes. The king, who sent nobles to the block for less, tolerated his fool's barbs. Why? Because in the mask of mockery, Henry heard truths he needed but could not bear from others. Sommers' survival was proof of the fool's delicate yet vital role. The fool's words often functioned as warnings. In Poland, Stańczyk, the famed jester of the 16th century, openly criticized political decisions. When courtiers mocked him, he retorted, "The real fools are those who do not see danger when it is upon them." His humor was edged with prophecy, his laughter shadowed by wisdom. Kings who ignored him did so at their peril. In this way, the fool became a political conscience, speaking what others dared not. But licensed mockery was not without limits. A fool who pressed too far risked ruin. Some were whipped, dismissed, or worse. Yet their role endured precisely because rulers needed them. In laughter, truth could be swallowed without open revolt. A fool's barbed jest might prick a king's pride, but it could also save him from disaster. In this way, the fool became both entertainer and guardian, his jests shaping decisions that affected entire kingdoms. The paradox was striking. The lowest in rank could speak with the highest freedom. A fool, clad in bells and tatters, could challenge the mightiest monarch. His words, though wrapped in jest, carried weight equal to crowns and swords. In a world where speech was peril, the fool lived by it, wielding laughter as both shield and weapon. And so, in the glittering halls of power, surrounded by sycophants and schemers, the fool's mockery rang out. Kings laughed, courtiers squirmed, and truth slipped through in disguise. Licensed by tradition, sharpened by wit, the fool told power what it least wished to hear, and in doing so perhaps saved it from itself. Though many fools have been forgotten, their bells silenced by time, a few have left their mark on history so deeply that their names still echo in chronicles and legend. These were not mere jesters juggling for amusement, but figures who shaped politics, influenced kings, and carved out a space for laughter in the darkest chambers of power. Among them, three stand tall: Triboulet of France, Will Sommers of England, and Stańczyk of Poland. Each proved that a fool's motley could conceal a sharp mind, and that mockery, wielded well, could alter the course of kingdoms. Triboulet, perhaps the most famous of French jesters, served Francis I in the 16th century. Small, hunchbacked, and sharp-tongued, he was a man marked by deformity, yet armed with wit so dangerous that even the king feared him. Triboulet mocked courtiers mercilessly, earning both hatred and awe, but it was his daring jests at the expense of Francis himself that made him legendary. When he insulted the king one jest too far, Francis declared he should die. Triboulet begged for the privilege of choosing his manner of death, a privilege granted to noblemen. With quick wit, he replied, "Then I choose to die of old age." The court erupted in laughter, and Francis relented. Tribulet's jest not only saved his life, but proved that laughter could diffuse even royal wrath. Across the Channel, in the volatile court of Henry VIII, lived Will Sommers, the king's poor fool. Unlike Triboulet, Sommers was not grotesque in form, but simple in demeanor, his gentle humor disarming where others provoked. He became Henry's confidant during turbulent times, soothing the king's notorious temper with laughter. When others feared to speak of Henry's crushing taxes or endless marriages, Sommers dared to jest openly. Chroniclers note that his presence calmed the tyrant, a remarkable feat in a court where dissent often ended on the scaffold. Sommers outlived Henry and served Edward VI and Queen Mary. His longevity proof that even a fool could wield enduring influence. In Poland, Stańczyk stood as a different kind of fool, less entertainer, more philosopher. He served 3 kings during the 16th century, his jests laced with biting political critique. While others dismissed him as comic relief, his wit often cut to the heart of Poland's struggles. One tale tells of him rebuking courtiers for celebrating a military victory, while ignoring greater threats looming to the east. "The real fools," he declared, "are those who rejoice while danger marches upon us." His mockery was not mere jest, but counsel in disguise, a voice of reason hidden in laughter. Beyond these great names, countless other fools played their part in courts across Europe. Some were dwarfs or men with physical deformities, chosen for their appearance as much as their wit. Others were musicians, singers, or acrobats whose humor lay in performance rather than words. A few were women, known as foolisses, who navigated the same perilous balance of comedy and critique in royal households. Each, in their way, carried the strange power of laughter into places where truth was often forbidden. What unites these figures is not their costumes or their antics, but their ability to wield humor as influence. They softened kings' tempers, revealed hypocrisies, and even shaped policies. They endured where others perished, not because they were safe, but because they were useful. The fool's paradox lived in them, mocked as simple, yet often the wisest in the room. In their stories, we glimpse the true role of the medieval fool. Not just clown, but counselor. Not just entertainer, but critic. They remind us that even in the most rigid hierarchies, laughter could open doors barred to reason, and motley could conceal a mind sharper than any crown's advisor. When we think of fools, we picture bells, baubles, and comic antics. Yet in the hushed corridors of power, fools often carried a far more dangerous role: diplomat, informant, and sometimes spy. Their position, both visible and invisible, allowed them to slip between worlds. They were laughed at, dismissed, even pitied. But that very underestimation made them invaluable to rulers who needed ears and eyes in places where swords and titles could not reach. The fool's strange freedom made him an ideal messenger. While envoys and ambassadors had to dress in finery, weighed down with etiquette, the fool could mock and tease foreign dignitaries without consequence. His words, wrapped in jest, could probe an ambassador's pride, test alliances, or even deliver veiled threats. A jester's quip might insult an enemy king without sparking open war, for after all, it was only a fool speaking. In this way, kings used their fools as living instruments of diplomacy, delivering barbs and signals hidden in laughter. Historical accounts tell us that European fools sometimes traveled with monarchs on diplomatic missions, their presence both entertainment and weapon. A jest told at a foreign banquet could test whether courtiers laughed sincerely or out of obligation, revealing hidden tensions. The fool's mockery might also expose an ambassador's arrogance or a noble's weakness, intelligence the king could later exploit. While others wore masks of courtesy, the fool's mask was his absurdity, behind which he gathered truth. In certain courts, fools carried secret messages. Their apparent lack of seriousness allowed them to move between rival camps unnoticed, delivering words in riddles or songs that only the intended listener could decipher. A song mocking a noble's greed might be nothing more than jest to most, but to the target, it could carry a warning or command from the king himself. In this way, the fool's art of disguise extended beyond clothing and into speech itself. Stanchik of Poland, famed for his wit, was also noted for his political insight, warning of threats masked by victories. Chroniclers suggest he acted almost as a shadow advisor, his role blurring the line between entertainer and strategist. Similarly, English jesters like Will Somers were privy to the king's most private moments, overhearing confessions and quarrels that no courtier dared repeat. Their laughter disguised their watchfulness, their presence at once comic and quietly dangerous. But being a fool diplomat carried risks. If his jest insulted the wrong noble, if his probing uncovered too much, he could be dismissed or punished. Some fools were beaten for jokes that cut too deeply, others simply disappeared from record, their usefulness ended. Yet rulers rarely abandoned the post itself, for they knew the fool's value as both a mirror of truth and a silent observer. The fool's spying was not always intentional. By his very nature, he overheard secrets. Courtiers assumed his presence harmless, speaking freely while he juggled or sang. But the fool remembered. And when he recited a rhyme in the king's presence, embedding whispers into verse, he became a vessel of intelligence, his motley cloaking him in invisibility. In this way, the fool was both trusted and feared, a shadow in bright colors. Thus, the fool was more than comic relief. He was a diplomat in jest, a spy in motley, a bridge between laughter and power. His role as entertainer gave him cover, his wit gave him tools. Where knights clashed with swords and nobles clashed with words, the fool clashed with riddles, leaving behind truths disguised as laughter. And kings, ever aware of his hidden purpose, kept their fools close, not just for mirth, but for the dangerous advantage only a fool could bring. For all their laughter, fools lived under a shadow that never left them. Their privilege to mock kings, lampoon nobles, and ridicule policy made them powerful, but it also made them vulnerable. A fool's life was a delicate dance upon a knife's edge, every jest a gamble. For while they enjoyed liberties denied to others, those liberties could vanish in a heartbeat if a joke cut too deep or a king's mood turned dark. The danger began with the very nature of their role. A fool's tongue was both shield and sword. When wielded well, it earned him favor, protection, and even affection. But if poorly judged, it could wound too sharply. A jest mocking a king's decision in the wrong moment could be taken as treason, no matter how much laughter followed. Fools lived by their ability to read the room, to sense when a ruler craved honesty disguised in laughter, or when he craved only flattery. One mistake, and the fool who once amused could become the fool who offended. There are stories of jesters who overstepped. In France, Triboulet himself once insulted a noblewoman so viciously that she demanded his death. King Francis I agreed she had just cause, but spared the fool only after Triboulet cleverly begged forgiveness in jest. Many others were not so fortunate. The annals of courts whisper of fools beaten, banished, or executed when their words struck the wrong chord. Their motley offered protection, but never invulnerability. The danger also came from enemies among courtiers. Nobles resented fools for their influence, their ability to say in jest what they dared not in earnest. A fool who mocked a powerful duke might find himself the target of intrigue, slander, or revenge. Behind their laughter, courtiers seethed, waiting for the day the fool's luck would falter. The very qualities that made fools indispensable to kings made them despised by others, and their survival often depended on the monarch's personal favor. Even kings' affection could sour. Monarchs were human, proud, vain, insecure. What they tolerated one day might anger them the next. Will Somers, though beloved by Henry VIII, surely felt this danger in every jest. Henry, infamous for executing even close friends, could easily have turned his wrath upon his fool. That he did not was a testament to Somers' careful wit and delicate restraint. Others lacked such skill, and their fates were grim. The danger extended beyond the court itself. The fool's irreverence often clashed with the church, whose authority he mocked with carnival humor. In times of piety or religious reform, laughter could become heresy. A fool's parody of a bishop might delight a king, but provoke the wrath of clerics, who wielded excommunication as swiftly as kings wielded swords. Thus, fools walked a perilous line between sacred and profane, between tolerated mockery and forbidden blasphemy. Even their physicality marked them as vulnerable. Many fools were chosen for deformities, disabilities, or eccentricities that set them apart. Their appearance made them spectacles, but also targets of ridicule. Some were mocked by the very courtiers they mocked in turn, enduring humiliation for the privilege of speaking truths. Their survival required resilience as much as wit, for behind the laughter lay constant risk of cruelty. And yet, perhaps it was this shadow of danger that gave the fool his sharpness. Knowing that one jest too many could cost him everything, he honed his wit to a razor's edge. He lived in constant negotiation, balancing honesty and entertainment, ridicule and reverence. Every performance was a test of survival, every laugh both triumph and reprieve. Thus, the fool's life was not as light as it seemed. Behind the bells and laughter lay tension, risk, and fear. He was free to speak where others could not, but never free from the consequences of speaking. His danger was his power, and his power his danger. The fool danced forever on the brink of ruin, his motley a costume not of joy alone, but of peril, cloaked in jest. If kings tolerated the fool, the church regarded him with suspicion. To the guardians of faith, the fool embodied disorder, irreverence, and the dangerous spirit of carnival. His motley mocked the solemnity of clerical robes, his jests turned sacred rites into parody, and his very presence in the court threatened the gravity of divine authority. Yet, paradoxically, fools also found their place within religious households, sometimes even serving bishops and abbots. The tension between laughter and sanctity defined the uneasy relationship between the fool and the church. The roots of this conflict lay in festivals of inversion, such as the Feast of Fools. In this raucous celebration, junior clergy mocked their superiors, donning absurd costumes, braying like donkeys, and parodying the Mass. What began as a form of release for the lower ranks horrified reformers who saw blasphemy in laughter. Councils across Europe issued decrees condemning the festival, and yet it endured for centuries, beloved by the people. The fool was its living heir, an embodiment of irreverence in a world of ritual. The church's hostility toward fools was not unfounded. Fools often mocked priests, bishops, and even the Pope himself. Their parody exposed clerical corruption, greed, or hypocrisy in ways sermons could not. A fool could joke about the fat bellies of monks or the simony of bishops, making crowds laugh where prophets and reformers risked persecution. In his laughter, the fool voiced truths about the church's failings that common people longed to hear. Yet the church was not immune to laughter's power. Some prelates kept fools in their households, enjoying the very irreverence they condemned. For bishops weighed down by ceremony, the fool offered relief, a space where even sacred hierarchy could be mocked. In monasteries, where silence was a rule, fools sometimes broke it with sanctioned comedy, offering levity amid prayer. Thus, the very institution that condemned fools also embraced them, unable to resist the lure of laughter. Still, suspicion never faded. Theologians warned that laughter was the devil's tool, that mockery undermined divine order. To laugh at sacred things, they argued, was to diminish the fear of God. Medieval preachers often thundered against jesters, condemning them as agents of disorder who led souls astray. Yet their very need to preach against fools revealed how deeply laughter had sunk its hooks into society, impossible to banish completely. The conflict also revealed a deeper paradox. Both fool and preacher claimed to speak truth. The preacher did so through solemn sermons, the fool through biting jest. Where one invoked scripture, the other invoked parody. Both competed for the ear of the people and the favor of rulers. Sometimes their voices overlapped, fools mocking sins that preachers also condemned, albeit in a different tone. This uneasy overlap blurred the boundary between sacred teaching and comic revelation. The Church, with all its might, could never silence laughter. Efforts to ban festivals failed, and attempts to exile fools only drove their humor underground, where it returned with greater force. Kings and commoners alike cherished the fool, and so he endured, a thorn in the Church's side. The more the Church sought to erase irreverence, the more society clung to it, as though laughter itself were a necessary counterweight to piety. In this struggle, the fool emerged not merely as comic relief, but as a challenger of authority in all its forms, political, social, and religious. His laughter was both dangerous and irresistible, his motley both mockery and truth. Against the solemnity of the Church, he stood as a reminder that even sacred power could be ridiculed. And though the Church thundered, the bells on his cap kept ringing, defiant echoes of a world that refused to bow entirely to silence. By the dawn of the Renaissance, the role of the court fool began to fade, his bells growing quieter with each passing decade. The very forces that once gave him power, ritual, spectacle, and the need for unfiltered truth, were shifting. Monarchies evolved, politics grew more sophisticated, and new forms of entertainment replaced the fool's jests. What had once been indispensable became quaint, a relic of a rougher, more chaotic age. One cause of decline was the rise of professional theater. By the late 16th century, playwrights like Shakespeare in England and Molière in France brought laughter to the stage with characters who inherited the fool's mantle. The wise fool became a stock figure in plays, mocking authority and speaking truths veiled in comedy. Audiences now flocked to theaters rather than courts for their humor, and rulers no longer needed jesters when entire troupes of actors could provide more polished amusement. At the same time, politics itself grew more guarded. Kings and queens of the Renaissance and early modern era ruled over increasingly complex states, where diplomacy, bureaucracy, and court etiquette required precision. In such an environment, the fool's irreverence felt out of place. A stray joke could disrupt delicate negotiations or offend powerful allies. As rulers became more image-conscious, the fool's mockery no longer seemed charming but dangerous, even reckless. The religious climate also hardened. The Protestant Reformation and the Catholic Counter-Reformation brought waves of moral scrutiny. What once passed as harmless carnival humor was now condemned as vulgar or blasphemous. In an age of fierce sermons, fiery debates, and deep divisions, laughter itself was suspect. The church's long campaign against irreverence gained ground, and the fool, so closely tied to parody and mockery, became a casualty of moral reform. Even within the courts themselves, new roles replaced the fool. Advisors, diplomats, and bureaucrats filled the king's chamber with counsel once hidden in jest. Poets and scholars, armed with eloquence, now dared to speak truths more subtly than fools ever had. The monarch's need for the jester's candor diminished, for he could now rely on letters, reports, and a professional class of courtiers. The fool's voice, once unique, was no longer irreplaceable. The decline was gradual, not sudden. In some courts, fools lingered into the 17th century, their motley faded but not yet gone. They became more entertainers than truth-tellers, reduced to acrobatics, juggling, or singing for amusement. Their political edge dulled. They were tolerated as curiosities rather than counselors. By the 18th century, the professional fool had all but disappeared from Europe's royal courts. Yet their legacy lived on in culture. The Shakespearean fool, Touchstone, Feste, or the fool in King Lear preserved their paradox, comic yet profound, ridiculous yet wise. The stage immortalized what the court abandoned, and in popular festivals, carnivals, and village fairs, the laughter of the fool still rang, far from the polished halls of power. The jester's spirit did not die. It simply shifted, finding new stages and new audiences. The end of the court fool was not just the loss of entertainment, but the end of a unique political voice. No one could again speak to kings with such dangerous freedom, cloaked in motley and laughter. The fool's decline marked the passing of an era when power could be mocked openly, when truth could sneak into the throne room disguised as jest. His motley was folded away, his bells silenced, but the memory of his sharp tongue endured. Though the motley faded from royal courts and the bells of jesters fell silent, the spirit of the fool did not vanish. It merely transformed, finding new faces, new costumes, and new stages. The legacy of the fool endured because his role was not bound to medieval courts alone. It was bound to human nature itself. Power, by its very essence, breeds flattery, and where there is flattery, there must also be truth-tellers disguised in laughter. The fool was never just a man in motley. He was a voice, and that voice still echoes today. The clearest heirs to the fool are the satirists. Where once fools danced in throne rooms, today comedians, cartoonists, and writers fill the same space in society. They mock presidents, kings, and priests, just as medieval fools mocked monarchs and bishops. Late-night comedy shows, political cartoons, and satirical plays all carry forward the fool's paradox, the ability to say the unsayable, to pierce the armor of power with the barb of laughter. Like their medieval forebears, they are dismissed as jesters even as their words spark public debate and shape opinion. The Shakespearean stage immortalized the fool's wisdom, ensuring his survival in literature. Characters like Feste in Twelfth Night or the fool in King Lear embody the dual nature of jesters, ridiculous yet profound, comic yet tragic. Their legacy lives in theater and beyond, teaching audiences that wisdom often comes in the guise of folly. Shakespeare's fools spoke not only to kings, but to audiences across centuries, ensuring that the archetype of the truth-teller in motley would never fade. Even in politics, echoes of the fool remain. Modern leaders, though wary of open mockery, often keep jesters of a sort close by, advisors, entertainers, or confidants who can puncture pride with humor. In some cultures, political satire is more than entertainment. It is survival, a way for societies to criticize leaders without risking outright rebellion. Just as in medieval times, laughter becomes both a shield and a weapon. But the fool's legacy is not only about politics, it is also about the human need for release. Laughter, irreverence, and parody have always been ways to cope with fear, suffering, and oppression. In medieval courts, the fool relieved tension where stakes were life and death. Today, humor still functions as an outlet, giving voice to frustrations and truths otherwise too heavy to bear. In every meme that mocks authority, in every joke whispered in oppressive regimes, the fool lives on. The paradox of the fool remains timeless. He is both ridiculed and revered, powerless yet influential, mocked as a clown but carrying truths sharper than swords. His disguise allows him to slip past defenses, to speak what reason cannot, to transform mockery into revelation. Where wisdom fails to persuade, laughter often succeeds. That is why the fool, though long gone from royal courts, survives in every society that values truth hidden in jest. Looking back, the fool's presence in medieval politics may seem strange, even absurd. Yet it reveals something profound, that even kings, crowned in majesty, needed someone to remind them of their mortality, their folly, and their flaws. The fool did this not with sermons or swords, but with laughter, the most dangerous weapon of all. His legacy endures because power still needs its mirror, and society still craves the voice that dares to mock what others dare not. So when we laugh at satire, when a comedian punctures the pride of the mighty, when a cartoon exposes hypocrisy in a single image, we hear the echo of bells long fallen silent. It is the echo of Triboulet, of Summers, of Stanchik, the echo of fools who turned laughter into truth. The motley may be gone, but the role endures. The fool's voice, forever disguised in jest, remains one of the strangest, boldest, and most enduring in history.